But, you know, it's going to
How about you?
My favorite. Yes.
Especially Russians are the bad
To Google Tilt Center. I'm retired. Oh, yeah, just down your bus
Trying not to wreck.
let me get off. Now I have to listen to my
Perfect. Everything's
So you've been out of the country for a while? What do you teach? What do you teach? College level, high school? No, what I'm saying is for like a lecture, then you can go to some interesting place and sponsor a little travel. Yeah, so you don't have to pay, but prolong. Yeah, that's why I said
Good evening, all. Thank you for being here tonight at Hill Center. Welcome. Sorry about the slight delay, but I'm happy to see you all now. I'd like to get started with a couple of announcements. Number one, and most importantly, East City Bookshop is over here in our East Gallery, and they have copies of Peter Baker's new book for sale. So after the program, please do make sure you grab one of those. Number two, please make sure you get a ticket to see Bill Press's conversation with Alice Waters on October 25th. It's a Wednesday. It should be a really great program, as all of Mr. Press's programs are. I'd like to now welcome Mr. Bill Press, Glenn Thrush, and Peter Baker.
All right. A little mic test. Is this mic on?
No.
No. All right. Eli?
Are you
how's
flipped
that?
on there?
I'm not sure I need it, but there it is. I can hear it now. Okay. Glenn, say good evening. Give us a little mic count.
Hello. Do I have to keep doing this?
Peter Baker.
Hi, my name's Glenn Thrush. I got the hat.
So, good evening, everybody. Great to see you. Thanks so much for coming. I want you to see that I'm using as my briefcase tonight. The Trader Joe's bag. This is the biggest event to hit this neighborhood. Some of you regulars may remember when we welcomed David Fahrenthold from the Washington Post maybe about a year ago, and we said we were here to celebrate the Pulitzer Prize in advance of receiving the Pulitzer Prize, which in fact happened. We are repeating that experience tonight by welcoming Peter Baker and Glenn Thrush from the New York Times. Or should I say, from the failing New York Times. Because I believe if anybody deserves the Pulitzer Prize for their reporting on, certainly on the Trump White House for sure, it's these two good friends. Peter Baker was with the Washington Post for 20 years before he moved over to the New York Times, the senior White House correspondent for the New York Times, and covering the White House under President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama, and the author of this magnificent new tome, the Obama administration, the Obama White House, the Obama presidency.
You took every photograph.
Yeah. The photographs are spectacular, and then the text covers the Obama White House all the way from day one to the sad day when he walked out and Donald Trump walked in. So no coffee table in Washington should be without one. And Glenn Thrush, also senior White House reporter for the New York Times, spent 8 years at Politico before moving over to the New York Times this year. Glenn, perhaps best known for his appearances on Saturday Night Live. Or was that Bobby Moynihan?
There's Bobby Moynihan out of John.
Oh, Bobby Moynihan, that's right. When you were tagging with Sean Spicer.
I had the kiss of career death.
So let's start with today. One of the real tests of any presidency is the time of a natural disaster when a president is expected to step up in the role of consoler-in-chief. We saw President Bush do that with the hurricane, President Obama did it with the earthquake. Today it was President Trump in Puerto Rico. How would you rate his his performance today, if we can call it that? Okay, do you want to start? Billy, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
My mic's not.
Is your
turn it
pack
on?
switched on?
You really can't.
I think it's on.
Well, it's
I
on
know.
now.
Apologies for
Yeah,
that.
you turn it up somewhere.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's all right.
How's that? Peter, we're talking. That's a little too loud. We're talking about Puerto Rico and President Trump today. A big test for the presidency.
Yeah, President Trump said he deserved an A+ for his for Texas and Florida, and he thinks he should get great grades for Puerto Rico too. Look, President Trump came to office. He never felt your pain. It's not his strength. It's not what he built his political identity. His political identity is as a fighter, right? He's out there mixing it up. He's going to drain the swamp. He's going to break some China. He's going to toss some people off his reality show. Never in his experience has he had, the experience of being a consoler-in-chief, of being somebody who is a national leader at a time of crisis. So this is a test for him, and it's the first time we've seen him really these last few weeks, if you add up the other hurricanes, through Puerto Rico and now Las Vegas. First time he's had to adjust to the role in which he calls for something other than tweeting out who you're upset about, right? And he can't quite stick to the message. Yesterday he gave a talk in the White House. He read from the teleprompter. The speech was well written. He said what had to be said. He said the same things most presidents would say. He didn't go off message. His advisors breathed a huge sigh of relief. Today he goes down to Puerto Rico, and there's not a script exactly, and he's off the script a little bit. You're busting up my budget. You guys need to do more for yourselves. What was the other one? Oh, you're lucky. You're lucky you only had, you should be proud that you had 16 people dead instead of thousands who died during Katrina. And it's like, I don't think he means to be off message or tone deaf, but it's a real risk, unfortunately, for him because it's not within his normal capacity to be, a comfort. He doesn't wrap his arms around people to make them feel better. And we've seen this before. That is a huge, huge, important skill for a president to have, and it transforms presidency. Reagan with the Challenger, Clinton with Oklahoma City, Bush with the Bullhorn moment and 9/11. These are authentic. Obama at various moments, particularly after Sandy Hook. These are moments when we want our president to be, our leader. We want him to transcend our partisan divide and bring us all together and help us make sense of something that makes no sense. And so he'll have another chance at this again tomorrow, and we'll see how that goes. But it's a fraught moment for him, and it's one that he doesn't bring a lot of experience to.
So Glenn, the presidential moment today was throwing the toilet paper.
It always is, right? At least we do. Yeah, I think Peter said, I think, is spot on in terms of him not having any experience in terms of consoling people. This is a huge issue for the guy. He is somebody who tends to orient everything towards himself. So when you are dealing with situations in which he is required to project his empathy outwards as opposed to inwards, or being a gravitational field that pulls emotion towards him, he's sort of an emotional one-way street. I mean, this is what you hear from the people who work with him. It is an innately uncomfortable situation. He appears to be physically pained in these environments when he is interacting with regular folks. And I'm sure what we're going to find out with Puerto Rico is that the people who he interacted with today were fairly strenuously strained for him, so that they were handpicked so that they would not create a fracas, because there was a fair amount of anger towards him in the city. There was an interesting encounter between him and the mayor of San Juan, in which he actually sort of semi-behaved himself. But you are dealing with a president, I think, and these sorts of situations encapsulated with a very limited bandwidth. We're talking about sort of projecting sympathy and empathy, and Peter invoked Bill Clinton's "feel your pain." This is a "feel your anger" president. So when you modulate to other emotions, he is a little bit out of his depth.
Right. And as you say, today's president to tomorrow in Las Vegas, where he said today that really what happened in Las Vegas was like a miracle. And everybody just went, what?
Yeah. He can't help himself. He doesn't mean to say things, I think, that are so jaw-dropping, and yet they come out, right? And I think by, you're lucky only 16 people died instead of thousands. I mean, obviously it could have been worse, and that is, a saving grace that Maria could have been a worse situation, but it's not the way you want to frame a message as the president saying, hey, thousands of you aren't dead.
Now, we should say that there's, the estimates are they haven't gotten to remote parts of the island.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible that we're going to see a really significant increase.
Of course, and the number isn't the point. The point is you've got an island full of people who have survived 2 hurricanes, who mostly have no power, mostly have no fuel, mostly have no cell phone service, looking for food supplies, and so on and so forth. And the challenge of Puerto Rico is not assuaged by thinking, well, at least we're not in New Orleans in 2005. That's not the way people look at their lives, And I think tomorrow the trick is even tougher in some ways, because it involves something even more unfathomable. And Mother Nature is what Mother Nature is. We can argue about climate change, but in this case, it's one of us who has wrought such a horrific violence on our fellow people, and we look to the president to help us make sense of it. And it's a challenge for the best of politicians. And again, as Glenn said, this is not one whose skill set is historically been empathy, it's been anger. And we all feel anger about what happened in Las Vegas, and maybe he'll channel that anger in a way that might be interesting. But the problem is he needs a target. When he has his anger, it has to be directed at somebody or something. And I don't think that he has a target yet on this one to do it. If it were a foreign-born Muslim terrorist, that would be one thing. If it were a racial incident, that would be another. If it would be a political thing, we don't know yet. We'll seem to find a logical motive here for a politician to grasp onto. So tomorrow, I think it's a bigger challenge for the day.
And he's also disadvantaged by the fact that he doesn't have a center ideologically for a set of semi-fixed policy positions. I mean, he's modulated fairly greatly on the gun control issue in the last 24 hours, sending out various signals. So what's going to happen is, and the NRA interestingly, as of the time we're we're meeting here has been relatively sotto voce on this one, which is pretty uncharacteristic. The question is, as we learn more about the shooter and we start being able to identify the various components of this case, for instance, the fact that the guy got the kit, where he could turn a semi into a fully automatic machine gun, will Trump be able to sort of keep it in check, and who will be providing him with counsel? If he feels, and Peter wrote a good story about this, I think over the weekend, he is a man, and I've been having conversations the last, I'd say 48 hours with a lot of his advisors. This is a man who's very much in fear of losing his base. He senses his own political vulnerability. So he might venture forward if he's in the milieu where he needs to be a unifier and speak in somewhat vague terms about gun control. But then when he starts getting the calls from the NRA and senses danger to his base, he is very likely to come out and say something which is diametrically opposed. That seems to be what his pattern is. Coming out and saying something that the room wants to hear initially, and then recalibrating based on what his political priorities are.
Were you surprised yesterday that Sarah Huckabee Sanders said, "Now's not the time"? What do you talk about?
I mean, like, look, I mean, forget about what your position on this issue is. You know, I was there when Obama talked about Sandy. Forget about. Let's just say, you know, let's render neutral the actual policy argument for just a moment, right? Of course, you're supposed to talk about this right now. Let's not shut up the country in what should be it's an appropriate national discussion on both sides of this thing. So it's the notion that and I was watching it on Twitter, even though I'm not supposed to be on Twitter anymore. I was observing this on Twitter, and there's this entire backlash against people who are discussing this as if they're politicizing it. I mean, the gun issue is an issue that I think is fairly pre-politicized prior to the events that happened. So, so the notion that Sarah Huckabee Sanders, with all due respect, a woman who, like everyone else who's been at that podium, does not have a sterling record in terms of truth, factuality, would dictate the terms of what our national debate should be. I think we should certainly question that.
Today, Peter, as you said, Peter, or Glenn indicated, I wouldn't say he's been on both sides of the issue, but he has sent some mixed signals. Today he said, we'll deal with gun control or gun laws like down the road or something.
Well, look, historically he has been on both sides. In the past, remember, he used to support an assault weapon ban. He supported President Obama's efforts after Sandy Hook to tighten some of the gun regulations. And then when he ran for president, he was all for the Second Amendment people, as he called them. Even at one point said Second Amendment people might take care of that Hillary Clinton problem.
Oh, remember that?
So he became a newfound convert to the idea of gun rights as a candidate. So you don't, as Glenn said, it's because he doesn't have an ideological core on most things. There are some things I think that are consistent in his history that he does genuinely feel, mainly the idea that America has been ripped off, okay? But when it comes to things like gun control or other these wedge issues over the years, he has been on all sides of the map at different points, and so we don't know what he genuinely feels. Glenn's point, I think, is to be well taken, though. Once you settle past the room, and he's probably gonna drift to where he came from, and where he came from to get to this White House in this moment was the conservative base, and they're not, of course, for additional regulations.
All right. So this is one facet of your job, which is covering the White House, and there are many facets of it. You know, developing resources among the staff, among the leadership, among the top administration people, going to the briefings, trying to sort out the truth, if there is any there. A big difference, I would imagine, in covering the Trump White House from covering the Obama White House. How would you sum it up? The differences, I mean, between covering the two White Houses. Don't even 9 months ago, you must remember what the Obama
We've come to full term.
Yeah, right.
Day, night, winter, summer. Look, some things are consistent throughout any White House. What this is about is diametrically opposite a White House as you can imagine from the previous one. And David Axelrod says that's what we do. He says we would like to remedy, not a replica. We tend to look at the next person to be the opposite of the one we just finished with. Obama was the remedy to Bush, and Trump was the remedy to Obama. But this one is not just that they're ideologically different or come from different parties. They are as different in personality and temperament and outlook and the way they view politics and the way they view people, the way they run things, as any two people could be, right? If Obama was reserved intellectualized and thoughtful and maybe sometimes too far according to his own people. You know, they would tell you that they wish to kind of get off the line and make some decisions now and then. Obviously, President Trump is somebody who will sit down with Chuck and Nancy and say, yeah, that's fine, let's do that. And he will, you know, he goes with the impulse of the moment. Obviously, if you're watching Fox and Friends, that means I'm going to tweet on whatever they just said. And it is a, you know, Bush used to talk about his gut. The truth is, this is a president who follows the moment. I think Glenn's afraid of stealing from him. I think is right. He lives from 10-minute to 10-minute increments. Is that right?
Yeah, it is in 10 to 15 minutes.
Can you talk about that? 'Cause I think that's actually really important to how he operates. If Obama is very strategic, again, sometimes to a fault, that's Trump's.
Well, I stole that.
And Glenn, that reflects how the White House operates.
Right. Well, I stole that from Maggie Haberman, who stole it from Roger Stone, and Maggie wanted me to steal it from Roger Stone. Let me answer your question first, and then on a more superficial level, though I don't think it's all that superficial, the words. The major difference for me is text. We have gone from the most articulate, probably the most articulate textual president we have had in modern history to the very least. So we are having, I mean, the thing about Obama is sometimes the speeches sounded like they were ripping, and as a criticism of him, but there was always, there was a certain, and I fought with this, and I was at many parties where I was speaking with speechwriters, right? But there was always a sense that words matter, and there was always a sense of being careful and nuanced in your articulation. As Peter said, sometimes too much so. That ain't a problem with this guy. To some extent, there is a certain refreshing quality about it. I mean, he sits down there in his bathrobe, and yes, he wears a bathrobe. And he gets on Twitter and he says whatever the hell pops into his head, or sometimes it's a calculated thing. There are tweets, by the way, I don't think people are aware, that actually are discussed with his team. And some, you know, some of the North Korea tweets, maybe not the Little Rocket Man one, were the product of consensus. But I think one of the big issues is the care that the Obamians had towards the language. And it is extraordinarily different to see press releases. It is very jarring, and I know this appears to be a minor thing, it is extremely jarring to see misspellings of people's names, grammatical issues in presidential press releases. I mean, it is to me a token of control, of controlling yourself, of controlling the country, that you have the capacity to control your own articulation. But in terms of the 10 to 15 minute increment point, Trump is a person who has survived things. It's funny that his show is called The Apprentice, because he really should have been called Survival. He is not somebody who has ever really thrived. He is somebody who has gotten out of a series of scrapes, kind of like Scooby-Doo. He beat bankruptcy 4 or 5 times. He got out of the casino business with his pellets still intact. And I think he views his presidency, and he is, I think, somebody who truly personally internalizes just how over his head he is at some times. He is moving from survival, the world is his Serengeti. He is viewing this in 15-minute increments of survival.
Flip side, from a reporter's point of view, one really interesting benefit of this presidency as opposed to the last one is that we have a far more open window into who he is and what he's thinking than we certainly do with Obama, and probably with any monarch. I can't tell you what Obama was thinking anymore. I can tell you what he said. I'm not 100% sure what he was thinking. I guess. But he was a closed book. He was opaque. Not just to us, but to his own staff, to people who were very close to him. He was a very tightly controlled guy, and you didn't necessarily get past the barrier. And it's interesting because he's an introspective person. His first book, of course, is all about self-discovery, and what I'm really hoping is his memoir gets a little of that reflection, and it helps us get past the shell. With Trump, what you see is what you get. I mean, he is exactly what you see, and we as reporters, thanks to Twitter and other things, we have a window into exactly what he's thinking at any given moment. There is no filter. And it's like the Nixon tape being played live on the news every night. You know exactly what he's thinking, even if every other political person in the world would say, don't say that out loud.
Yeah.
And from a Carter's point of view, I think that's kind of interesting.
So what impact does it have on your job? when Donald Trump hates you, or at least says he does, and calls you the enemies of the American people, the failing New York Times, fake news. How you both talk to him? I mean, does he?
He's just saying out loud what the others think.
Is he saying out loud? Is he saying out loud what he thinks?
Obama.
I think Obama felt that way. Honest God, I think all these guys think that. Maybe not as viscerally, maybe not as, but they just won't say it out loud because it's just not politics. And this guy is a mix. He thinks it, he believes it, he feels it, and it's also shtick, right? It's also a useful political technique because he needs an enemy. He plays well off an enemy. The Democrats are so weak, right, quite honestly, right now that they don't play a good enemy, right? So who does he have? He has the enemies of people who think.
I think he craves our approval too. I mean, that's another, you know.
One gets the impression that, yeah.
There were times Barack Obama looked at me and I got the distinct sense, he's like, you're using carbon. Like, couldn't you be using, it's your right to use your carbon and stuff. This is how you're going to choose to spend your life. Peter, I'm glad you can do that. But someone else really might want to do better with your carbon.
Yes.
You're doing great. But I mean, Trump is a needy character, and like the people who have succeeded around Trump are people who know how to who figure out a way to orchestrate his need and cater to it.
If you wouldn't mind going there, what do you think of Sarah Huckabee Sanders? How's she doing?
Glenn?
By the way, have you guys checked out the beautiful artwork? Seriously, the photographs and everything.
Glenn's a Sarah fan, I don't know.
Personally, yeah, I like Sarah Huckabee Sanders personally. That doesn't mean I think she's telling the truth a lot. I think they are still. I think the nutritional value of the daily briefing is very, very low. I think there were periods of time, I would just say in no one's particular defense, but there were periods of time, particularly during the Jay Carney era of the Obama administration, where the nutritional value of the briefing was also quite low. The one thing, though, and this is a real puzzle to try to figure this out, Peter and I have actually talked about this, do we like to be lied to just in a nicer way? Like, do we want the guy lying to us to just do it the right way?
Better,
right? Like, I mean, part of the problem with like dealing with Sean Spicer is he was just a crappy liar. Like, I was like, Sean, stop! You're not supposed to lie to us that way. There are ways to lie to us that look much, much better on TV. So the question is, have we just been kind of reared on a better kind of lie?
What I would say about Sarah, among other things, I would say is the thing I appreciate about her is that we have lost some of the ridiculous drama that we were having under Sean that was unnecessary. Will we be kicked out of the building? Will we keep the cameras on? We're not keeping the cameras on. It was stupid, distracting, and unnecessary, and accomplished nothing other than perhaps satisfying the boss. I love the idea that Spicer was mixing it up. Sarah has at least, gotten rid of that nonsensical stuff. I don't think we're getting a whole lot of nutritional value, as Glenn says, and I don't find that there's a lot coming from the briefing worth writing. But that's also the true under previous administration. Maybe not as Glenn said, maybe not quite as bluntly.
Right. Back in June, Glenn, you wrote about the president getting pressure from his staff, the people around him, to put the phone aside and to stop tweeting.
Right.
And he defends the tweets as his opportunity or ability to bypass the media and get his message out.
He is 100% right about that. I mean, it's an interesting paradox because the one thing you see consistent in polling is in excess of 65% of the population moving up into the 70s disapprove of this tweeting and think it's harmful to the country. And a substantial majority of Republicans and even people in the base feel the same way. Yet it is undeniable that this is the man's bullhorn, and it has been integral in terms of his capacity to communicate his message directly. I think the Twitter account is going to be the most, it's hard to predict these things, it's going to be one of the most durable aspects of the Trump presidency. Because this can go a lot of different directions, some very dark, some not so dark. You could have somebody who's much more effective in using it as a tool in a more more surgical way. Or you can just have it incorporated into the armamental communications of the presidency. But I think Trump, there have been times when Trump is enormously effective at projecting this message based on, particularly on trade, and particularly when it's calibrated properly on foreign policy, but that doesn't seem to be something he's doing.
Not always, yeah. But I'd say this, I mean, just as a matter of self-interest, if we stopped, if you cut off the Twitter, we'd have to lay off about 60 people in our bureau. So I mean, against that, we wouldn't have nearly as much published.
By the way, for those of you who may be new here, so we go for another 5 minutes or so. Not that I will run out of questions, but we want to leave you the opportunity to ask questions as well. So you can be thinking of those. Pete, I wanted to ask you about one chapter in the Obama book, which is called Never Fear to Negotiate. Now that seems to me to strike a difference between the previous administration and this one. As you wrote on the front page yesterday, and we all know, that he told the Secretary of State to stop this crap. Stop diplomacy. We don't want that anymore. You're wasting your time, Rex.
Stop wasting your time.
How significant is that? Is he just playing, showing off for Kim Jong-un, or is he serious?
The problem is, it's hard to know when it's good cop, bad cop, or when it's the madman theory put into play, right? I mean, Nixon, of course, famously said to Kissinger, you know, the madman theory. You tell him you've got this crazy president back there, and I don't know what he's going to do, so you better give us concessions on whatever they were looking for. The question, but Nixon knew it was a strategy. And the question is whether Trump is, you know, consciously applying a strategy, or this is just genuinely instinctive on his part. He says this about, don't waste your time talking with Kim Jong-un, but it was just 3 months ago he said he'd sit down with the guy. He's a really smart guy. He'd be happy to on the right circumstances. During the campaign last year, he said I'd sit down with him and have a hamburger. We negotiate out. So you can't take today's position all that seriously because it could be different by tomorrow. Now the problem is for Rex Tillerson, who's also already had 7 or 8 months of the worst months any Secretary of State has ever had. You know, it just leaves him hanging on the limb. If it's a tactic, if it's a strategy, fine. But the truth is, it doesn't look like one, and it doesn't leave Tillerson looking like he's going to be effective. The most important thing for Secretary of State is to be seen as having the imprimatur of the president. That's why James Baker was successful, because he was seen as a blood brother of George H.W. Bush. Anytime he flew into a capital, they knew they had the word of the president himself there. That's why George Shultz was successful under Reagan. That's why John Kerry had trouble, because people weren't 100% sure they necessarily had Obama's imprimatur, which he didn't actually on some things. And Tillerson is just like, you know, a man on an island at this point. And I think the question, he doesn't really want to stick around here. He wants to, you know, get out, but he probably wants to stick around for at least a year, so it looks, you know, like it was a decent amount.
So, just 2 quick additions. Tillerson wants to get out. He submitted you know, what we've heard is there's a letter of resignation. I think a lot of cabinet officials tend to do that. Apparently there's a financial interest that Tillerson has in terms of remaining for an entire year, which is not insignificant when you're a man of tremendous wealth. The other thing is...
Hard to believe he would need any more money.
Yeah.
But
There's a tax benefit to being a cabinet secretary. You get to take all your investments, sell them, and not pay taxes on them in a deferred way for many, many years. It's not new. It's not specific to this cabinet.
The second issue...
This is a cabinet billionaire, so that does help them.
yeah.
The second issue, with the exception of Tom Price, as we know. The second issue is, I think, on the North Korea thing, and I've heard this lecture from members of his own staff, he talks a lot about North Korea when he wants to change the topic. You know, there is this gaslighting thing that he does. He really does. He has a sense that he needed to turn the topic. He was in as bad a state, and he's been in some bad states, as he's been over this Luther Strange loss in Alabama to Judge Boyd Moore. He's right, and the healthcare less so. This Luther Strange thing, particularly because Steve Bannon was just thumbing his nose at him, and that really pisses him off. So I think if you notice, if you look at the pattern for when he ratchets up the rhetoric on Kim Jong-un, it accompanies typically a loss. The other thing that's interesting that I heard from a couple of people in the last 24 hours is one of the reasons he calls him Rocket Man is because he may not necessarily know how to spell his name. And by the way, as someone, I sometimes screw it up myself.
Is it J-O or J-U?
No, you know. Rocket Man's kind
The story that hit the last couple of days, is it just funny or is it serious? About the private email server, Jared and Ivanka Trump. Seems to me, I remember that a private email server was somewhat of an issue in the 2016 campaign.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there are two things. One is the substance of it, and one is the
Optics.
appearance of it, the optics. First of all, on the substance of it, I'm not covering this, I guess, so I may have this wrong, Glenn will correct me. It's not a private server, they use private Gmail accounts, it's a slightly different thing. Secondly, in theory at least, we're being told that all work-related emails that come into these accounts are also being forwarded to the White House. So one of the issues on this is under the Presidential Records Act, all things that you say in emails that are related to work should be captured as a permanent record, and that's one of the things that Hillary Clinton was seen as avoiding by doing the private server. If you use your private account but everything gets sent back to a White House account at the same time, you're not in violation of the Presidential Records Act. That's perfectly fine. Then there's the issue of classified issues. Is anything in these emails potentially classified, which of course was something that was hung around Hillary Clinton's neck for a variety of emails that frankly she didn't probably know were going to be classified because they weren't marked that way at the time. And those are substantive issues. I don't know the answer on the last part too. On the optics, obviously, is terrible because it was such a huge issue. It was a locker-up issue, rally after rally, and people aren't going to focus on the first part of the distinction because those sound like subtle differences. Why are you guys doing the exact same thing you heard about and said she's going to be able for?
The way it's been described about our NatSec people is, I'm trying to remember this correctly. I mean, essentially, Hillary, when she went into the State Department, said, "I'm going to use my private server. I'm not going to use the State Department email." None of them did this, and under the Presidential Records Act, if retrospectively you send all the relevant emails, you're not in violation of the law. There is a difference. The ironic part about this is, you're talking about Jared Kushner. You're talking about a lifelong Democrat who probably voted for Hillary Clinton. That's a guess.
Enough of Trump. A couple of questions about Obama. You both covered the Obama White House. Having been there, what do you see as the lasting legacy of Barack Obama, if there is any left, or if there will be any left?
Well, it is interesting, and I kind of looked at this. Every new president comes in when he set a new direction from his predecessor. I say his because right now we haven't had her. We will get there. But very few have come in the way Trump has, determined to systematically bulldoze the specific things that have been done by the predecessor. Right? Reagan came in and went in a different direction than Carter, but he didn't sit there and try to whack away at the specific programs Carter put in place. Bush didn't, Obama didn't actually take down Bush's counterterrorism programs. He actually kept most of them. Right? Trump seems determined to find every specific thing he can that Obama did and take a sledgehammer.
Does he have a whiteboard? We've heard somebody would say with a
Bannon
list
had
of
that
things.
whiteboard.
Bannon did.
And a lot of it was on him, exactly. Now, a lot of it hasn't been successful, but there are some things that have, and you see now the lessons for Obama. When you live by the executive order, you die by the executive order. You can't get a consensus in Congress to pass something. If you rely entirely on your power as president, it will have a clock that expires the minute you leave office, because the next guy can come along and completely reverse it. So what will Obama's legacy be? Some things you can't reverse, some things Trump can't do. Obviously, he pulled us out of the Great Depression, the Great Recession. He prevented a new depression, arguably. He obviously authorized a mission that killed Osama bin Laden. He won 2 terms as an African American in a country that even 300 years after our arrival here is still struggling with the legacy of slavery. These are not small things. You can argue that he made great progress on climate change, even if his EPA regulations are reversed and Paris is pulled out of it, that the culture has changed in a significant and meaningful way that will outlast his presidency. And I think his numbers come up a little bit in the last year, partly because people have sort of begun to appreciate the things he did do and the things that he was, even if he wasn't everything they wanted him to be. Ultimately, the first line of his obituary is still going to be first African-American president. He knows that. It's not what he wanted. He wanted to be known for more than that. But that's not a small thing either. And while I think he's very frustrated by race and frustrated by Donald Trump's election in particular, what that said about the divide in this country, in the end, kids were my kids' age was 12, Glenn's kids' ages were 14, grew up only knowing one president, and that's Barack Obama, and he is African American, and it doesn't seem remarkable to them. It's just the way it is. That's not a small thing, and in 20 years and 30 years, we will appreciate that more than we probably do today.
Well, to agree, ditto. And it seems like Obamacare is somewhat durable, a little more durable than people thought.
Yeah.
As Axelrod said when I was bashing him for Recovery Summer in 2011 and failing to sell this thing, he said, look, once you know, whatever we've done wrong, once you give somebody a benefit, you can't take it back. It's never been done in American history. So we might very well be dealing with Obamacare as a durable legacy. The other thing is, as Peter said, he is, I think, you know, there's a great book, How the Irish Saved Civilization, how they kind of preserved the learning from antiquity, right, in all the monasteries. I think Obama, after the Trump experience, is going to serve, I think, as a bridge to whatever comes next. I think he clearly, whatever you thought of his politics or his accomplishment, he set an example for treating people in a dignified way and comporting the presidency the way that one would expect.
Okay. Final question for me. So, Peter, you wrote a great book about the relationship between George Bush and Dick Cheney. It was really eroded toward the end. What about how does Joe Biden fare after the Obama presidency?
Barack Obama. It's interesting because in some ways Biden.
Yeah, with his relationship with Barack Obama, but also with his relationship with the American people, his standing.
Biden.
Biden.
Yeah. It's interesting. Biden came in, I interviewed him right when he came in as first vice president ever bragged that I ever heard of saying he would be less powerful than his predecessor. Right? Biden came in and said, I'm not going to be a change, I'm not going to be anywhere near as powerful as he was. It's not crazy, but he actually was an important vice president in a lot of ways. For one thing, he humanized Obama. Obama, who had his robotic moments, and didn't particularly like Joe Biden at first, came to appreciate him in a way that was surprising, I think. Whereas Bush and Cheney kind of drifted apart, I think Obama and Biden kind of drifted together to some extent by the time they were over. And I think he found Biden a very human figure and came to overlook things that annoyed him about Biden, which were many. And I think Biden, today, particularly among Democrats, comes off as pretty good. He seems like an authentic person who is who he is. The terrible ordeal he went through with his son made him human in a way many politicians don't seem to us. I think the idea that he runs again seems fanciful. I think he had a moment, possibly, last time, and even then, probably not.
Right. So did Barack Obama talk Joe Biden out of running in 2016? And if he had run, would he have won?
Yes, he did. He certainly did. With David Plouffe as his hatchet man, made it very clear to Joe Biden that he didn't want him to run. Biden was very badly hurt. I mean, Biden did want to run, but I think the death of his son, Beau, really shattered him in a way. And I got caught in the middle of that reporting on it. It was funny when I was in Politico. We had one reporter who was reporting that Biden was definitely going to run, and I wrote kind of a corrective piece on it based on talking to people like Ted Kaufman, who were very close to him, who said that the running, that Joe Biden can't live privately. Like he is not fully capable of being just a private person.
He's actually like Trump in that way.
Right, he derives a lot of.
In the best way, both of them are very authentic, open people.
Well, I'll give you an example of how Biden, like a personal example of the slight difference between Trump and Biden. When I was flying around on Air Force 2, for instance, and I have what is known as a Semitic central nervous system. So I sometimes have difficulty flying on airplanes. And Biden had heard that I was on a bumpy flight to Detroit, and I'm white knuckling him. And all of a sudden I look up, and Biden is holding my hand. The plane is going like this, and Joe Biden, and he's like, "Move over, buddy," and he's got my hand like. Biden is doing this. He's like, "Buddy, everything is going to be okay." When Donald Trump does that to me, I will either know I took the wrong answer, or something fundamental has.
Did you tweet this?
Glenn Thrush, Peter Baker, every day. We'll start right alongside of you there, I guess. Eli? Yeah.
First of all, I want to thank all three of you for what you're doing. I think it's so important, and I want you to know how much you all really appreciate it. I mentioned that the president did a good job yesterday talking about that, but I really didn't think it was a very good speech. It seems like
I say he stuck to the speech.
He seemed to have speechwriters that write for him. It seemed to be, he's not a religious man. It wasn't a very good speech. It was just not horrible.
Somebody great on the curve, right? No, that's true. Look, that's a fair point. But it's, you know, given the other possibilities, you know, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? And it's in a moment when everybody was roiled and emotional and upset, not adding to that was important. It doesn't mean suddenly he's the second coming of Ronald Reagan or Bill Clinton. You know, he's not suddenly changing to something he's not. But at least he recognized that it was important to stay in the script. He recognized it was important not to go off, you know, in some spontaneous way and to find a target and start, you know, punching. That this is a moment that wasn't welcome. And
But wasn't that John Kelly? Do you think, Glenn, that?
Well, no, there's actually been a couple of additions to the speechwriting shop, which is, yes, it is John Kelly.
But John Kelly said stick to the script.
John Kelly, well, I don't think you say that to Trump. I think you kind of like, you create an environment where you're like, sir, your best interest, this is how Kelly kind of talks. Sir, your best interest will be served. Let me help you. Let me provide you, sir, with the tools that you were not provided in the past so that you can be helped. So I'm going to give you the best speechwriting staff. And sir, you are going to be up there with the great presidents in the country. A very, very interesting stylistic thing has happened in the West. My own reader knows this too. When you walk up from lower press, sort of past the Oval Office into upper press where the press secretary and the senior officials sit, there's a wall of photographs. Now, throughout the West Wing, the official White House photographer tends to strew photographs. And in Obama, it was Pete Souza, was a very good former Chicago Tribune photographer, really good stuff. Early on with Trump, they were all just Trump sitting around with that same expression on his face, you know, surrounded by Saturn rings of white folks. So like all of them kind of, you know, sitting at like a reflective table, you know. You don't know if they're grimacing or grinning, right? What has changed, and it's fascinating, is there are pictures. There's a famous photographer named David Hugh Kennerly who takes these iconic pictures of presidents acting like presidents. LBJ with his hand and reading a piece of paper, and whoever was doing this, I don't know who the photographer is. Trump now has on the wall these candid pictures of Trump, not looking very Trumpy, not looking like he did during the campaign. In moments of decision, there was one picture of Melania sitting inside of what looked like a railroad car, looking at her own reflection. And what occurred to me is, I think Kelly is selling Trump on the traditional aesthetics of the presidency. That he's starting to sell Trump on the notion like, you've been wearing this schlock off-brand crap for the first 7.5 months. Let's open up the closet and get you wearing the right clothing. And I think that kind of speech yesterday fits into that.
Two things about the photographs, at least when I was up there last. One thing was, the photographs I saw were all black and white, right? Which conveys this historic impression, right? Like FDR, like TR, like Lincoln. The second thing is the frames have changed, but they're not gold.
Over there.
They are not gold. Yeah.
Well, you know, nobody's perfect.
Yes, all right, pretty well. Up front here and then over this one too. Yeah. You only have one microphone, Eli?
Yes.
All right.
But so first of all, I'd obviously like to thank both of you for being here today and sharing your wisdom. I'd like to ask about recent reports about Oprah considering a 2020 presidential bid, and what you think, if you think that she would be qualified, of course, to present a challenge to President Trump.
Oh, that's period.
A year and a half ago, I used to say things like, that can't happen. I'm really trying hard to learn not to say that anymore, but that can't happen. obviously anything can happen. I think that you know, she obviously has a phenomenal following, and she's an iconic figure in our culture. But I think that the Democrats aren't organized enough to do that, and B, they're going to look for somebody who stands up as a contrast to Trump, which is to say, a celebrity might not fit that mold. And I think that we also know, frankly, 2 years from now, we're talking about this in the car on the way over, where we're going to be in our politics. What's happened with Mueller? What's happened with the midterm elections? Is there a Democratic House? Are we talking about impeachment? Is the president still happy being in office? So trying to project ahead right now is so problematic. But I hope she runs. I think it'll be fun.
Do you have any insights there?
Look, there's an alternative. The thing that Peter said that I must agree with is the Democrats might be moving in an anti-celebrity way simply because of what happened with Trump. The other thing is, the one thing is, black women played an incredibly important role in the primary in a lot of states. So, from a demographic perspective, that's also significant. The last thing is, there is a possibility we have a new model of the presidency. We have kind of a figurehead celebrity who's able to cash in on the celebrity, then backstopped by a competent professional staff. So, one of the legacies of Trump could be, I'm not saying this is likely, is you have a division between kind of a head of state and a prime ministerial function, where you have like your chief of it, somebody who's very close to Donald Trump today essentially said that John Kelly is president of the United States. They said that about Rahm early on with Obama, but I think it's much more true.
About the question of the base, talking about the base, is it evolving? Is it changing? What are we supposed to think?
You're talking about the Trump base.
Trump base.
Yeah, right.
That's the word.
How big is it, and is it still with him and always going to be with him?
Well, well, we don't know the latter. We do know that it is, and this is a good way of answering it, it is dying. Like, we are dealing, this is the Magic Lantern show that David Plouffe and Joel Benenson and all, Clinton Obama people will give you. We know that it is roughly between 28 and 36% of the population, and it does fluctuate. What we do know is Trump's famous quote about he can go in the middle of Fifth Avenue and kill people and then stick with them. But we have seen changes in erosions, and I think what's really important for people to understand is Trump really hasn't lost independence. Has lost a significant number of the independents according to the polling. And without those independents, Ohio's gone, but Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, a lot of these states would look much, much different had the picture of independence been what it is currently. And the other thing that he's losing is more educated and female Republicans. Now, we're in a situation right now where there is no Democratic alternative that has yet presented itself. And as we know, these elections are competitive. They are not sort of a referendum on any one person. The big mistake Democrats made is making it all about Trump. So I think Republicans have this, and we saw this particularly in 2004 with George W. They do have this tradition of coalescing around a Republican candidate, regardless of what their misgivings might be. Democrats do not have that history. So, Trump's base is entirely dependent on who the Democratic nominee would be. So,
right. I'll let you choose. I am too many decisions here. Right.
My question is simple. It's about Melania Trump and the role that we saw with Michelle Obama and how that contrasts and the Free Melania movement. Is there anything to that? She should be on her own free will.
That's a Glenn question. Except my editor would be really mad if I let him answer.
I will.
Short answer, we don't know. We have not had any real exposure to Melania in any real way. I don't think any of us has interviewed her since she became First Lady. She does not give the impression of somebody who's all that thrilled to be be there. For that matter, Michelle Obama wasn't all that thrilled to be there either. She made more of a sport of it, I think, eventually. Melania might. She's only even now just sort of staffing up. And she did a few things the other day. A week or so ago, she had like 3 or 4 events in a week, which was striking. Gave a speech, did a trip to Toronto, her first solo foreign trip, did an event in the Garden. So you might see her beginning to find, she went with Trump today, she went with her husband today to Puerto Rico, I think she's going to Las Vegas tomorrow. Probably, again, that probably helps humanize it a little bit. So you may see her beginning to take a little bit more of a role, but it's so behind the scenes, and so under the radar, I don't think we have it.
She does get the tone of these events better than he does, though. Like yesterday when she was walking out to the Garden with him for the moment of silence, she seemed genuinely moved. You know, and I think like, even on these trips down to the hurricane, you know, her fashion faux pas notwithstanding, it is interesting, and it's telling too, that her stiletto heel thing really was a blip. It didn't really resonate because it doesn't really capture something fundamental about her. And she, you know, she can appear from the distance to be somewhat plastic, but people who know her and are around her in the White House say that's not how she is. So I think there is, I think she is an upside surprise in the administration, and not a lot of them.
How about right here in the middle? Eli, just bounce around.
I can talk loud though. Okay, I have been living on a hill for 40 years.
I'm sorry.
I have been living on Capitol Hill for 40 years. I'm from Italy, the country of Machiavelli. I came to this country and I was totally amazed that Carter had written a book, I Will Never Lie, which to me seemed totally absurd. Now I hear you both talk about, or 3 of you, about the degree of falsehood or non-truth in Obama's press conferences and Trump. And yeah, but I'm totally puzzled that it's just a matter of scale and degree. Is that true? What happened to America?
Well, I think the scale and degree is rather strikingly different though right now. Look, every president lies, even Jimmy Carter, and it's invariably couched in nice words and you know, parsed in some way or another. Well, I might have said that, but really what you missed is that adjective, which gives me an out 2 years later when we discover the opposite is true. But this case, this president is just so radically different in scale. It's just, and the question is how much of it is intentional and how much of it is the inability to process and hold on to facts, right? And this is not a small issue. This is obviously a pretty important issue. But when he gets up there and he says, for instance, as he has repeatedly, that I'm going to negotiate a bilateral trade agreement with Germany, even after he's been told again and again and again, you can't do that. Germany's part of the bloc. You have to do the whole EU. Angela Merkel personally told him this. It doesn't stick. He says it again. Is he lying, or is he just unable to hold on to facts? In that case, probably it's a factual absorption problem. In other cases,
Also known as an FAP.
Yeah.
Or FAP.
FAP.
I apparently know the same.
But there are obviously other issues where he is saying things that have no bearing on truth, and he has been told they're not true, and he says them again and again because they provide a narrative that he wants to either sell us or he wants to sell himself. And we struggle with that. We struggle with that because it's our job as reporters to be neutral, to be fair, to be balanced, not to take sides. We're not trying to be pro or con, but it's also our job to call them out, anybody out, if they're the president and they say things are not true. So we've hired fact checkers. As an industry, the fact checker industry is doing really, really well right now, and I think it's our obligation to continue to point out where he says things that are just factually not true.
He's totally advantaged by the fact that we hate to say the word lie. Like, you know, it was a big deal when the Bertha thing is a lie. We put it on the front page of our paper. Hillary Clinton, apropos of yesterday, was not going to repeal the Second Amendment, I think, right? And he, you know, there were several statements at press conferences. I think when we fact checked the press conferences, dozens of actual misstatements of facts and lies and stuff. So he's on a scale that's like he's the Michael Jordan of this stuff. So, I mean, we can't ever forget that. And the thing about it is we are bound, you know, it's like we are, you know, fighting with one hand behind our back on this sort of thing, because we do have constraints in terms of how we express ourselves, because I think it advantages us in the long term to not scream at every single little thing that he says. But it does allow us, and the question is, long term, are we becoming desensitized to this? Is this why he seems to be impervious to a lot of the things that we think are going to inflict? I don't know.
But to what extent do you have an obligation to tell the truth? I mean,
Well, we take that very seriously. I think the question is, how do you do it? You know, it's our job to point out factual falsehoods.
Let's take the size of the crowd at the inauguration.
Right. Well, obviously that wasn't. I mean, we've only used the word, the L word, to say, hey, you know, 2 or 3 times, and at the express direction of our executive editor, because we don't want to cheapen that. We want to. If we're going to use it, we want to use it when we feel very confident about it. I'm very comfortable with the L word talking about politics because it implies intent. You have to, you know, to say that a politician says something wrong is fair enough. We can do that. You said this, but this is what the facts are. We should do that. You can say you said this, and this is what the facts are, and here's why you might say something that are not factual for your own benefit. Fair enough. Use the L word implies that somebody knows they're deceiving intentionally. And while we might assume that, while we might guess that, while we might, come to that conclusion based on what we've seen so far, it really requires mind reading, and
reporting.
And reporting in some cases, and I'm reluctant. So I think we should do that sparingly when we have the justification.
Well, my favorite recent example of the L word, as Peter put it, was, you know, when Trump went out there and misled about the crowd size, and then he pushed Sean Spicer out to scream at everybody without taking questions. Sean Spicer parodied himself at the Emmys. I get Sean on the cell phone. This is my favorite. I say to Sean, in pretty clear terms, do you have any regrets about doing that? And he says, yeah, of course I have regrets about doing that. I print that. Sean then says, you made that up. You took that completely out of context. I was like, what kind of context? So we have different layers of dissembling and misinformation just piled upon one another.
I think we have time for a couple more. I'm sorry that more time, but this gentleman here, way in the corner.
I'm interested. What's your take on Comey? Is he a principal guy? Is he a political animal? Some of each?
I will say that I don't know. So I would be careful about coming to conclusion. I would say that the broader consensus on him is that he is somebody who is principled within his understanding of what he considers to be principled, right? Now, that doesn't mean the Democrats are happy with the way he considered last year's investigation to be conducted in a principled way. Doesn't mean that Trump is happy with the way he considers this year's investigation to be conducted in a principled way. But within his philosophy of how to do the job, he saw himself as being principled rather than partisan. And one thing even his critics haven't said is that he is dishonest. You know, the people who really, really, really don't like him, who really thought he was unfair about last year and torching Hillary Clinton's campaign, blah, 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 generally would not say that they thought he was dishonest. They would say they thought he was honest, even if he had bad judgment. And that's important because we're now in a situation where Robert Mueller is going to have to weigh credibility on some of these conversations. If James Comey said this happened and he recorded it in real time, in writing, does that outweigh the President of the United States who said it didn't happen? Well, if it's a credibility contest between the two, that's a pretty important consideration. But it's a fascinating figure, right? Like, I don't think I can think of anybody in Washington who has managed to piss off both Democrats and Republicans in such a powerful way in such a short amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't have any real great insights into Comey. The one thing I will say is, like, people at the Bureau seem to be supportive of him.
At the FBI.
At the FBI, and I think, as Peter said, this investigation is going to go, all this paper and all these conversations gets built into the public, and people have ample opportunity to relevant.
Eli? Wrap it up here. Yeah.
The narrative has been that the national security team is the most competent in decades and reasonable people. And then you read that Kelly didn't want a refugee cap of 45,000. He wanted a refugee cap of 15,000. What's your judgment of that set of people, McMaster, Kelly, and Mattis?
Well, I think, you know, it's an interesting question. I think two things. One is I think that if people think it's the most talented national security team of decades, they would be overstating it. I think they are. It is fair to say people think it is a team of people who do have experience and seasoning, and that's not necessarily the case with everybody in the White House. But having said that, I think that Kelly is an interesting figure because I think that people, because he is a general and a Marine, and seems to be take charge, commanding kind of guy without being overly pacified. He strikes everybody as being, aha, okay, he's the guy who's gonna, you know, rein it in. But in fact, Kelly's more, I think he's been more on board with Trump on some of these policies than people have perceived, particularly on immigration issues. He's not somebody who's going along reluctantly on some of these. I think he believes that. I think he is in the Southern Command, believes that there is a problem at the border. He's in favor of, if not the wall, exactly something strong like a wall. He believes in a hardline position on immigration. And that's not because Donald Trump told him to think that, and he's not just a conveyor of Trump's position on that. This is a genuine position, and that extends to refugee.
Yeah.
Another word? Yeah. Oh, so don't forget, take a copy of the book home with you. East City Books is here with copies of the books. I have to say, first of all, thank you all for coming tonight. I am in awe every morning when I pick up the New York Times and read the reporting of Peter Baker and Glenn Thrush. Thank you both for being here.